The landscape of the internet is filled with an unending amount of different aesthetics. More than just mere styles, most of these end up forming real internet communities of people tied by things like taste, or ideas, or even obsessions. What might start as a collection of coherent clothing choices or visual elements might end up becoming a real lifestyle, often characterized by the romanticization or fetishization of different activities or behaviors. For example, does anybody still remember dark academia? What used to be simply a preference for certain types of fabrics or colors in clothing quickly became a not-so-niche community in which the act itself of reading a book and poorly discussing it, or I don't know, using fountain pens, became more important than the actual books themselves and their literary or cultural importance. Among a slew of different aesthetics, there was one that always stood out to me, both for the concept that drove it, but also for the fact that it immediately failed. I'm talking about deep webcore. Let's get into what it actually is, what makes it so fascinating both from a stylistic point of view, but also and mostly from an ideological one. And let's see why it never stood a chance. So what the hell is even deep webcore, you might ask? If you try to search for deep webcore on Google, you might get just one result, and it's a Reddit thread from 7 years ago in which the OP posts a description of the style and even adds an album of pictures that would be inspo for the style. The image folder is now gone, so yeah, rip. You'll have to trust me with what I show you. From what I gather, the style itself seems to have been born, as many things are on the internet, on 4chan. Specifically FA, the board dedicated to fashion discussions. The Reddit post itself takes the description of the style from a 4chan post, so let's read it together. A style focusing on the antisocial aspects of too heavily consumed internet media and knowledge of or participation in the dark web community. Apparel often borrows the antisocial aspects from the internet techwear community while emphasizing the comfort of thrifted and oversized coats and track jackets, worn-in, ill-fitting jeans and casual pants and dark sneakers or boots. Main points of focus are the antisocial public impression, agoraphobic tendencies, crass or inappropriate public activities influenced by internet communities, heavy drug use of any/multiple types, and downright federally observed criminal behavior. Sounds kinda dumb, right? Heavy drug use, criminal behavior? I just want it to look spiffy. But there's already some interesting details worth of discussion. I'd divide them into two big categories, the aesthetics of behavior and the aesthetics of appearance. Both deserve our attention, but let's start with the latter, the aesthetics of appearance. In here we can insert anything that pertains to the actual clothing part of the trend, its influences and specific items. As the post mentions, the main source of influence is actually techwear, which had much more fortune than its degenerate spawn. Let's read a short explanation for what this aesthetic is from one of the main posters on the subreddit. User This Is Anton, who by the way also has a YouTube channel. Techwear is a fashion subgenre which combines ultra-modern, futuristic or utilitarian aesthetics with technical performance and functionality. It often takes functional design cues from outdoor and military clothing and recontextualizes them for everyday wear in urban environments. If that sounds a bit vague, it's because it is. Ultimately, we're not talking about a single well-defined aesthetic here, but a range of styles and looks which overlap with streetwear, gorpcore, and other fashion subgenres. In short, it's a cyberpunk or urban ninja style. The face being covered is not a must, but it is a welcome addition. It's a style that emphasizes functionality, and supposedly you should look like you can do some sick-ass parkour, but also hack into the mainframe. While somewhat LARPy, it did have enough of a distinct aesthetic that it attracted a lot of people and has endured in the years to come on image boards and on the internet in general. It even spawned a few different sub-styles, like lunarcore, which is the same but makes you look like you live in space, I guess, or on the moon, or darkwear, which is its goth variation. And if we try to look at some of the images that were posted when people were still talking about deep webcore on 4chan, we can see that influence. Often, whenever we see deep webcore fashion being discussed, the images that get posted are very techwear adjacent, relying mostly on the color black and having as one of their main points anonymity. But if we keep digging, we find a surprising lack of cohesion in here. And we see droves of people complaining about the fact that deep webcore is not even a thing. Its fundamentally scatterbrained nature left many baffled as to why it was even being discussed in the context of fashion. And it's hard to disagree. The more you look into the remnants of this trend, and the more you understand why some people would say that it is anti-fashion, actually. A term to describe styles which go completely against whatever the fashion establishment is pushing at the moment. Either as a show of a political or ideological stance, or just because you don't care about how you dress. Which really just gives credit to all the complainers. Although for how angry many of them were, the irony is that anti-fashion actually pertains to the fashion discussion. So yeah, it's like a snake biting its own tail, pretty much. Anyway, the most important point here is not tied to the clothing part of fashion. It's more so about how fashion reflects one's personality. It's the fact that the styles by which you're attracted say something about you. When it comes to taste, most people gravitate towards something that expresses their own worldview or themselves. Which takes us to the most interesting part of deep webcore, and it's that other category that I've mentioned before. The aesthetics of behavior. There's been a lot of discussion at this point, both academic and not, about how internet aesthetics relate to people's identities, their emotions, their taste, or even their pathologies. It's undeniable that something that seems so silly is actually part of a complex relationship that all of us entertain in some way or to some degree with the World Wide Web. It's an ever-present reality that in time has only expanded and dug its roots even deeper in our psyche. To the point where many suggest that we're already cyborgs without the need to graft technology directly onto our bodies. We constantly interact with the virtual world, giving it more and more power each day and making it feel at times more real than reality itself. This relationship has also extended to aesthetics, personal style, and fashion. The access to globalized communication has completely revolutionized the way in which people react or interact with the fashion trends. They're not as localized as they might have been once. It's not only up to advertisements, TV, or films to promote them. Nowadays you could live in, I don't know, fucking Sholdanyest in Moldova, and the fact that you have access to the internet might one day make you wish for a pair of, I don't know, Rick Owens grilled boots or something. That might be too specific, just know that that's something that doesn't happen without the internet. But of course, the main thing that gets shared is not really clothes, it's more so ideas, tastes, and life experiences. Or to put it in a more topical way, vibes, bro. Any one of us could get enamored at some point with an art form, a music genre, a TV series, and on the internet we might find a community that actually revolves around that interest. And this is true not only for the stuff that comes from the real world, so to speak, but also from internet-born trends. I've already talked before about stuff like weirdcore, dreamcore, or traumacore in my pergoliminal video, and about how these different aesthetics, while having some predecessors outside of the web, are totally an internet age phenomenon. These are aesthetics that don't have any rules per se, but more so a shared ethos. And it's one based more on the feelings that a particular piece of art or an image might evoke, rather than any concrete set of principles. Although, don't get me wrong, these are present at the end of the day because people get influenced by each other's works and ideas, but there's no real guidelines, you know? This, in turn, obviously reflects the fluid nature of internet content itself. And it was always hard historically to define a specific artistic movement, but critics always tried to do it, with their categories sometimes becoming canonical. Or we even had cases of artists themselves creating guidelines for a certain movement. Just think about something like the Futurists. But for the internet age, I'd argue that if that's not completely impossible, it's kinda silly to do. We can also notice how, especially in modern history, many of these movements were also really tied to a lifestyle. Or vibes again. Think of stuff like 19th century bohemianism, or again, futurism, or my favorite, the Italian scapigliati. These are not simple artistic movements, but more so groups of people who shared some belief that in some way went against the status quo or against society. Anti-fashion, if you will, but somehow still very attractive to some small minorities. And I'll propose that things like weirdcore and specifically deep webcore fit exactly in that mold. Now, I don't like to make big generalization, especially if we use heavy words, but I think that most of these movements are somewhat tied to trauma. And it doesn't have to be some specific type of trauma like childhood trauma in the case of traumacore, but more so like a generalized pain that you can't really pinpoint on your body. I'm talking about a generalized trauma with one's society, with the status quo, with the jail of normalcy. It's as if these people managed to look at society from the outside, almost as if they didn't participate in it, and saw how dysfunctional it really is, even if the consensus of the majority would call that normal. If we go back to the description of deep webcore, we notice that the behavioral part of it occupies more space than the actual fashion or clothing part of it. And this is already a pretty big clue. Just from the mention of antisocial behavior, drug use, and criminal activities, we see that this aesthetic is also somewhat against society or against the status quo. It's a rebellious aesthetic. But the main element to focus on right now is the one that gives it its name: the deep web. In 2012, the American band Death Grips released their second studio album called No Love Deep Web. The album marked the end of their collaboration with the label Epic Records, which, according to the band, wanted to postpone the release of the album to the next year. Death Grips decided to self-publish the album online on the 1st of October 2012, uploading it to their website, to SoundCloud, and to file-sharing sites from which people could legally torrent it, completely going against the label's wishes. After also promoting the album through an ARG, in which people would have to follow like encrypted digital breadcrumbs to get to a specific site and actually find the release date of the album, and also a mixed copy of The Money Store, their first album. No Love Deep Web was a bit of an internet phenomena, with the BitTorrent downloads reaching 34 millions. And this is probably due to the hype that already existed around the band. Created in no small part by the Melon Drop's 8 out of 10 given to their first mixtape, Ex-Military, and to what I think is his first 10 out of 10 given to their first studio album, The Money Store. And also obviously the upstream discussion around the band on sites like 4chan and other forums. In IRL conversations, I've sometimes called Death Grips the Zoomers Nirvana. The way that Cobain managed to put his finger on the angst of the teenagers from the 90s and ride it to stardom is unmatched. The man's lyrics and music managed to capture the youth's feelings, frustrations, and fears perfectly. And his apparent distaste for the world of show business only added to that aura of a relatable, damned artist that only searches for the power of expression or something. And so, one generation later, we got another American trio with a clear distaste for the rules of society and music, which blows up suddenly: Death Grips. Only this time the social landscape has changed. The youth's angst has expanded to include the infinite variety of the internet's rabbit holes, transforming it into a new form of anxiety and paranoia. I'm guessing especially in the US with the post-9/11 surveillance of the population. Death Grips' music is not only angsty, it is a pastiche of different themes and elements that seem to directly mirror the scatterbrained nature of the World Wide Web. This is evident in the music, especially in the seemingly random samples that they use, but mainly so in Riot's lyrics, which contain themes of the abuse of the internet, of the abuse of drugs, of internet surveillance, of government surveillance, of distrusting others, occultism, and whatever else you can think about. It's sort of a contemporary vorticism that could give Pound a run for his money. Most of this stuff was already present in Ex-Military and The Money Store, but in No Love Deep Web the paranoia seemed to sharpen. Especially in songs like Come Up and Get Me and World of Dogs, it seems like Riot has taken copious amounts of drugs and stared into the darkest recesses of the internet for way too long during a manic episode or something. He screams about hiding in abandoned buildings 24/7 with covered windows and waiting for somebody to come and kill him, and of being constantly watched. It's music for glitchy CCTVs. I don't know what that means, but it sounds right to me. The whole album really sets up perfectly what I think that the deep web core is supposed to represent. And it's no coincidence that you'll see Riot being constantly posted in these threads, almost like a perfect encapsulation of the style. Let's analyze this for a second. Riot is always seen sporting the same look pretty much. Dark jeans, a dark t-shirt or jacket, and a scraggly beard. Even more often he's seen without a shirt, which reveals his skinny physique and occultism-themed tattoos. He seems clearly anti-fashion in this sense. But of course people are fascinated by the possible hidden stories that his tattoos and lyrics imply. And this is even more ironic if we consider that we know almost nothing about this man, seeing as he's a very private person. All of this has created a sort of mystical aura around him, while also making him seem like a nobody, or better yet, an anybody. Anybody can identify with Ride specifically because of how little we know about him, but also because of how interpretable all of his lyrics are. The guy himself is a vibe, not a traditionally good one, but a vibe nonetheless. And so it's no surprise that a site like 4chan, where anonymity is one of the main appeals, has chosen him as one of its mascots for at least some discussions. While the movements from the past that I've mentioned seem like the rejection of society through a sort of outsider observation, deep web core seems like very much the same thing, but where the observation happens through the virtual depth of the screen. As I've said before, these aesthetics or movements seem to come from some sort of trauma. And in the case of deep web core, it would be the trauma of unrestricted access to the internet. I think it's no secret for most of us that the internet is a dangerous place with many messed up things in it. The amount of people I've seen dying horribly on here is worrying. And I think that anybody from my generation will still remember that one chainsaw video. Yeah, you know the one. Somebody in middle school could just come up to you and be like, "Yo dude, look at this!" And it would be like Pain Olympics or some shit. And little by little your childish innocence would break. That kind of stuff stays with you, especially if you're young. And this is not even talking about real dangers like scammers or groomers or other web homunculi ready to do horrible shit to you. But still, we grew up with it, got used to it, desensitized, and kept surfing the web. In fact, a lot of us might have found internet communities and became part of them. Especially those of us who felt like they were misunderstood or different in the real world. Many would seek refuge in the company of internet strangers who might have lived on the other side of the world, but who would be connected by similar interests. If everything went more or less smoothly for you, you would have a good balance between a real social life and maybe an online one too. But we all know of people who got sucked into the internet and slowly, started to detach themselves from the real world and from their social life and real friends, and became a sort of hikikomori or something. I think that it is possible to get to the point where you see the world through the lens of the internet, and it is a distorted lens, which might make you question everybody's intention and might make you feel like your everyday life is much worse than it actually is. But then, depending on how much you've seen or by the different sites you were browsing, you might start feeling the same way about the virtual world. And at that point, you find yourself in a sort of weird no man's land. The real world is filled with fake people, sick societal norms that restrict your power of expression, our governments suck ass and are constantly surveilling our every move. But at the same time, the internet is filled with literally fake people, with scammers, groomers, criminals of all kinds, who could also be observing your every move. It's filled with conspiracy theories and other types of informations which you can't unsee, that makes you question everything, etc. And so you're stuck in a sort of psychosis of your own making, in which the real and the virtual seem to blend, giving you no escape, in which you're never safe. As a side note, it's no surprise that in one of these threads I found a sort of mood board for what the creator called net stalk. Again, how does internet gang stalking translate into a personal clothing style? Well, it doesn't, unless wearing Serial Experiments Lane t-shirts or Amnesia Scanner merch somehow reflects that. Now, obviously all I've described so far is taking the topic very seriously, and it's more applicable to people like Terry Davis or others with real mental health issues and obsessions. When we come to the actual deep web core trend, we're mostly referring to internet users who like Mr. Robot, Watch Dogs, and Death Grips way too much, and romanticize this idea of a chronically online person who's seen too much. But as I've said before, there is a reason for which people gravitate towards it, and I'm not just here to make fun of their taste. In fact, I get it. I myself sometimes felt like I was losing my mind by learning stuff on the internet, and my perception of what I could trust both online and in the real world was getting very confused. You know, when you find the hidden information which they don't want you to know and shit like that. But I guess that my refuge ended up always being real life. If I ever felt overwhelmed, I would just unplug, go outside and, trigger warning, touch grass, and maybe see a friend or two. But I can see how for someone with no real social life, unplugging could become a bit of a problem. And I guess that something like deep webcore could unite people who feel this way. A sort of more fashionable anonymous. And we cannot ignore that idea of participating in illegal activities. What does that refer to? I think it has a tinge of sticking it to the man. It's probably something like doing illegal trafficking on the deep web, or selling drugs, or hacking into companies to, I don't know, steal money or something, exposing the elites for their evil activities and, you know, the usual Mr. Robot stuff. So maybe part of the fascination comes from the fact that it makes you feel like you could do something, you know, something useful either for yourself or the world. A sort of weak call to action, I guess, in which you don't have to get up from your chair. But there's another big problem, and I think it's one of the main reasons for which the style could never take off, even in concept. Its main characteristic is antisocial behavior, the distrust for people both in the real world and online. And that basically denies you the opportunity of creating an internet community. As we've seen, many of these aesthetics thrive on communities. So when you got none, you probably have no real way to promote this aesthetic without, you know, people creating new content and discussing it, except like two guys on 4chan or something. And other than that, also the fact that there's no coherent visual theme. There's nothing fascinating or attractive to people outside of this trend. I think that really the whole appeal comes down to the fetishization of the idea of forbidden knowledge. Maybe it's a way to make your excessive use of the internet feel like something special, if it's something that has basically become part of your personality. And on that one, I'll have to agree with 4chan posters which say that it sounds very dull, to be honest. If you're personally into this aesthetic or know something about it or are just interested in sharing your opinion, please do so. I'd really like to see different perspectives on it. Also, I very much hate to do this, but if you like what you're seeing so far and want to see more, please consider subscribing to the channel. Apparently it helps with analytics. As I've said before, deep webcore has pretty much died out shortly after its inception. The aesthetic was scatterbrained and had no real cohesion, and its cornerstones relied more on behavior than actual style, so why even bring it up at this point? Well, for one, it's just an interesting piece of niche internet history which I've witnessed firsthand, but also because to me it feels more relevant than ever nowadays. Many of us are in a totally symbiotic relationship with technology at this point, and we've just kinda accepted it. Forget about the fear of being watched. A lot of people at this point just share everything about their life on social media for others to see. Oh, Orwell, we're really in it now. We've been living in a dystopic nightmare for a while at this point. But at least by paying attention and using our brains, we could separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. Unfortunately, another player has been making a name for itself in the online game. AI. Ooh. Now, I'm not gonna go in depth with it because we're bombarded every single day with information about it, and if you're anything like me, you're sick and tired of hearing about it. But it is all true. A ton of people seem to have completely fried their frontal lobe and can't seem to understand any basic information without asking ChatGPT or Grok to regurgitate an explanation for them. More worryingly than that, as probably most of you know, Skynet is getting pretty good in the audio and video generation department. And it got this good in the span of only like 2 years, so you can imagine our future. Don't worry, if there's a hell below, we're all gonna go. Soon we might be completely unable to distinguish real footage from AI-generated BS. And at that point, what's gonna happen? What are we to do when we can't even trust our own eyes and ears anymore? Well, one answer would be the same that I've given before. We could unplug, go outside, and live our real life, in a world which we can actually touch and make sure it's real. And that definitely helps, but something still worries me. It seems that the more we move forward, and the more when you encounter people in real life, they seem to be hyper-connected to internet discourse. You'll constantly hear the same shit you can already read on social media, the same discussions, the same arguments, and it's not even original because they're just regurgitating what other people wrote. I feel like I've seen a unicorn anytime I meet one of those people who are completely disconnected, who know nothing about what's going on about any internet discourse. Godspeed you. So in this context, where the online world is just an AI-run pile of rubbish, which has spread to infect the real world because everybody's screen time is like 25 hours a day, deep webcore, like a dark horse, rises from the ashes, and it seems more attractive now than ever. We're living through a whole new generalized generational trauma, and who knows how we'll come out on the other side. At this point, why not hide your identity from everybody, go into an abandoned building and do copious amounts of psychedelics and just completely lose your mind? I mean, we all seem to be going insane anyway at this point, aren't we? Thanks for listening to my yapping, be well, and see you, space larpers.